Gerald Whitmore spent 30 years as a civil engineer before retiring to his lakefront cabin in the Pines of Serenity community, a quiet, wooded development of about 40 homes nestled around a pristine, spring-fed lake in rural Tennessee. What the HOA board didn't realize, and what Gerald never felt the need to advertise, was that the lake wasn't community property. Gerald's grandfather had purchased the lake and surrounding acreage in 1961. The development was built around it decades later, and through a series of easement agreements, residents were permitted recreational access. But the lake itself, every square inch of shoreline and water, belonged to the Whitmore Family Trust, and Gerald was the sole trustee. For 2 peaceful years, Gerald kept to himself, fishing off his dock at dawn, maintaining the shoreline, even stocking the lake with bass and bluegill at his own expense. Then a new HOA president took over, Diane Heller, a retired corporate manager with an obsession for rules and a personal vendetta against anything she deemed unsightly. Diane decided Gerald's small fishing boat, his tackle shed, and his habit of cleaning fish on his own dock were eyesores and violations of community aesthetic standards. The fine started at $150, then $300, then $500 a week. Gerald attended a board meeting to calmly explain that his property predated the HOA's jurisdiction. Diane cut him off mid-sentence and told him he could comply or litigate. So Gerald chose a third option. He contacted his attorney, who drafted formal letters revoking the community's recreational easement to the lake, effective in 30 days. Gerald then hired a surveyor to mark the legal boundaries with bright orange stakes. He posted no trespassing signs every 20 feet along the shoreline. He installed a chain across the boat launch, and he waited. The panic was almost immediate. Homeowners who had marketed their properties as lakefront living watched their real estate values wobble. The community pool couldn't compensate for the loss of the lake. Diane called an emergency board meeting and tried to claim the lake was common property, until Gerald's attorney presented the original deed, the title history, and the revoked easement documentation. Diane attempted to pass a special assessment to fund a legal challenge. The community voted it down overwhelmingly. Within 6 weeks, the board held a recall election. Diane was removed by a margin of 34-3. The new board president personally visited Gerald's cabin with a written apology, a full reversal of every fine, and a humble request to renegotiate lake access. Gerald agreed, on his terms, in writing, with a clause ensuring no HOA board could ever again fine a property owner for activities conducted on private land outside their jurisdiction. He went fishing that evening. The lake had never been quieter. The morning mist sits low on the water, curling like cigarette smoke across a lake so still it could be glass. Gerald Whitmore stands at the end of his dock in unlaced boots and a flannel shirt that smells like cedar and coffee, a rod in one hand and a thermos in the other. It is 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in April, and this, right here, this exact moment, is the reason he survived 30 years of highway overpasses, drainage calculations, and municipal budget meetings. He casts without thinking. The line hisses through the air and lands with a soft plop near the far bank, where the bluegill like to hide beneath the overhanging sweet gum branches. The reel clicks. The lake accepts the offering in silence. Gerald is 63 years old. He has a bad left knee, a good pension, and absolutely no interest in being anywhere else. The cabin behind him isn't much to look at. A 1,400 square foot A-frame with a green tin roof and a wraparound porch that sags slightly on the south side. He built the porch himself the summer after he retired, using pressure-treated lumber in a level he'd owned since 1986. It isn't perfect. He doesn't care. The view from that porch, the lake stretching out like a mirror framed by loblolly pines and red maples, makes perfection irrelevant. What most people in the Pines of Serenity don't know, and what Gerald has never felt the need to broadcast, is that this lake belongs to him, not metaphorically, not sentimentally, legally. His grandfather, Earl Whitmore, purchased the lake and 42 surrounding acres in 1961 from a tobacco farmer named Clyde Jessup. The deed is filed in the Monroe County Register of Deeds, Book 14, page 337. Gerald has a certified copy in a fireproof safe in his bedroom closet, right next to his discharge papers and his late wife's wedding ring. Earl had been a surveyor by trade and a fisherman by obsession. He'd found the spring-fed lake on a topographic map while doing contract work for the Tennessee Valley Authority, driven out to see it on a Saturday, and made Clyde an offer before sundown, $4,000, cash. Earl built a one-room fishing shack on the North Shore and spent every weekend there until his knees gave out in 1979. Gerald's father, Dale, inherited the property but never shared Earl's passion for it. Dale was a numbers man, an accountant in Knoxville who preferred golf courses to shorelines. He kept the taxes paid and the title clean, but the fishing shack slowly rotted into the hillside. When Dale passed in 2003, the property transferred into the Whitmore Family Trust, and Gerald became the sole trustee. By then, the world had grown up around the lake. A developer named Harmon Beck had purchased adjacent parcels in the late 1990s and built the Pines of Serenity, 41 homes on winding roads with names like Lakeview Court and Heron Lane. Beck needed access to the water. It was the entire selling point. So he negotiated a recreational easement with Dale, granting community residents the right to swim, fish, and launch non-motorized watercraft. The easement was revocable. Dale's attorney had insisted on that. Beck agreed because he assumed no one would ever actually revoke it. Gerald knew all of this when he bought his cabin in the community 2 years ago. He knew it when he signed the HOA covenants. He knew it when he shook hands with the neighbors who welcomed him with a casserole dish and a pamphlet about trash collection schedules. He just didn't think it would matter. He reels in the line slowly, watching the lure skip across the surface. A great blue heron stands motionless in the shallows near the boat launch, hunting with the patience of something that has nowhere else to be. Gerald understands that patience. He has spent his whole life solving problems with math, patience, and the right paperwork. He doesn't know it yet, but he is about to need all three. The sign at the entrance reads, Pines of Serenity, established 1989, in carved wooden letters, forest green against cream. It sits between two stone pillars, wrapped in creeping jasmine, and in the summer, the scent hits before the visual does. Sweet. Almost too sweet. Like the community itself. 41 homes. That's it. 41 houses, arranged along 3 winding roads that loop through old-growth pine and red oak before dead-ending at the lake. No gates, no guardhouse. Just the sign, the jasmine, and a 2-lane road that branches off County Route 12 like an afterthought. The homes range from modest A-frames, built in the early 90s, to newer construction. Vinyl-sided colonials and the occasional log-style cabin with a wraparound porch. Nothing flashy, nothing cheap. The kind of neighborhood where people wave from riding mowers and leave tomatoes on each other's porches in August. Gerald notices all of this the first time he drives through, and it settles something in his chest he didn't know was unsettled. The HOA, on paper, is unremarkable. Annual dues of $1,200 per household. The money covers road maintenance, snow removal, liability insurance on the shared pavilion near the boat launch, and a modest landscaping budget for the common areas. The CC and R's, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, run 14 pages. Gerald reads every one of them before closing on his cabin. Old habit. 30 years of reviewing municipal infrastructure contracts teaches a man to read the fine print. Most of it is standard. No commercial vehicles parked overnight in driveways. Exterior paint colors subject to board approval. Trash bins stored out of sight, except on collection days. Noise ordinances after 10 p.m. The language is firm, but not aggressive. The kind of rules that exist because someone, at some point, did something annoying enough to warrant a paragraph. The board, when Gerald moves in, consists of 5 members. President Tom Adler, a semi-retired dentist who runs meetings like he's still telling patients to open wide. Efficient, painless, over before you know it. Treasurer Linda Fong keeps the books clean and posts quarterly financials on the community bulletin board outside the pavilion. The other 3 rotate through their roles with the enthusiasm of people who volunteered once and can't figure out how to stop. Board meetings happen the first Thursday of every month in the pavilion. Attendance averages about 8 people, and half of those are there for Linda's Lemon Bars. Disputes are rare. When old Bill Hutchins paints his shutters maroon without approval, Tom calls him, they talk for 6 minutes. Bill repaints them burgundy, which is on the approved list, and everyone moves on. This is the Pines of Serenity Gerald buys into. This is the version he shakes hands on. He doesn't attend many board meetings himself. Doesn't need to. He pays his dues on time, keeps his property immaculate, and nods hello to neighbors when he passes them on the road. A few of them fish off the public dock near the boat launch, and Gerald never says a word about it. The easement agreements his father renewed in 1994 grant recreational access to all community residents. Swimming, fishing, non-motorized boating. The language is clear, the terms are generous, and Gerald has no reason to revisit any of it. The lake sits at the center of everything. It's what the brochures mention first. It's what the real estate listings photograph from 3 angles. Lakefront community, lake access included, serene lake views. Not one of those listings mentions who owns it. Gerald finds this amusing in a quiet way. He sips coffee on his dock at dawn, watches a great blue heron stalk the shallows, and thinks about how many people assume that something beautiful and shared must be something public. It isn't. But for now, that distinction doesn't matter. For now, Tom Adler runs the board, Linda Fong bakes lemon bars, and the Pines of Serenity earns its name. That's about to change. Tom Adler's cardiologist is about to have a very serious conversation with him. The first morning Gerald wakes in the cabin, a loon calls from somewhere near the center of the lake. 5:47 a.m. The sound cuts through the pre-dawn stillness like a question nobody needs to answer. He lies there in the dark, listening to the water lap against the dock pilings, and for the first time in 30 years, he doesn't set an alarm. That becomes the rhythm. Dawn. Coffee on the dock. The creak of the old Adirondack chair his grandfather built from cedar planks back when Eisenhower was president. Gerald watches the mist lift off the water in slow, curling ribbons, and he fishes. Not for sport, not for dinner necessarily, just to feel the line go taut and know something alive is pulling back. He stocks the lake himself that first spring, but 200 largemouth bass and 300 bluegill from a hatchery outside Knoxville. Pays $4,200 out of pocket. Doesn't tell anyone, doesn't need to. The fish aren't a gift to the community. They're a promise to his grandfather, who'd kept the lake healthy for 40 years before Gerald took over the trust. The neighbors notice, of course. They notice the way the fishing improves. They notice Gerald hauling bags of limestone to buffer the water's pH. They notice him out on the aluminum john boat with a rake, clearing invasive hydrilla from the shallows every Saturday in June. "You're doing God's work out there," says Tom Peretti from 3 doors down, leaning over the split-rail fence one afternoon. Tom's a retired postal carrier with a sunburn that never fully heals. He holds out a 6-pack of Yuengling like a peace offering, though no peace needs making. Gerald takes 2. They sit on the dock and talk about nothing important, bream beds, weather patterns, whether the Vols have a shot this year. Tom never asks who owns the lake. Gerald never brings it up. That's the thing about those 2 years. Nobody asks. The Pines of Serenity operates on a kind of benign autopathy. The HOA board meets quarterly in the community clubhouse, a converted double-wide with wood panel walls and a coffee maker that produces something closer to warm rust than caffeine. The president is a man named Bill Dawkins, 71, who runs meetings in under 20 minutes and whose primary governance philosophy can be summarized as leave people alone. Dues are $200 a month. They cover road maintenance, the community pool's chlorine budget, and a landscaping crew that mows the common areas every 2 weeks. Nobody gets fined. Nobody gets letters. The CC and Rs exist in a 3-ring binder on a shelf in the clubhouse, and Gerald suspects most residents have never opened it. He reads it, though, cover to cover, one Tuesday evening in October of his first year. Old habit. 30 years of reviewing municipal codes and infrastructure contracts have made him the kind of man who reads the fine print on a ketchup bottle. He notes the easement language on page 47, section 12.4, recreational use of adjacent water features. The word adjacent does a lot of heavy lifting. The word permitted does even more. The easement is revocable. It always has been. Gerald closes the binder, files the information in the back of his mind the way he'd file a load-bearing calculation. Not because he expects to need it, but because ignoring structural details is how bridges collapse. He goes back to fishing. The seasons turn. 2 summers. 2 autumns where the maples along the eastern shore burn orange and crimson and drop their leaves into the water like confetti at a parade nobody organized. 2 winters where the lake doesn't quite freeze, just goes still and gray and reflective as a mirror. Gerald replaces 3 boards on his dock, paints the tackle shed, waves to his neighbors, sleeps better than he has in decades. He doesn't know it yet, but Bill Dawkins is about to resign for health reasons, and the woman who replaces him has already started making a list. The flyer appears in Gerald's mailbox on a Tuesday in March, tucked between a seed catalog and his electric bill. It's printed on canary yellow cardstock, the kind that screams, "Pay attention to me," and it announces the Pines of Serenity's annual board election results. Gerald almost tosses it with the junk mail. Almost. The name at the top stops him. Diane Heller, President. Below it, a bullet-pointed list of community improvement initiatives in a font so aggressive it borders on hostile. Gerald stands at the end of his gravel driveway, reading the list twice, the March wind cutting through his flannel. Aesthetic standards enforcement, property compliance audits, quarterly exterior inspections. Asterisk. He folds the flyer in half and tucks it into his back pocket. A blue jay screams from the pine canopy overhead. Gerald walks inside, pours himself coffee, and doesn't think about it again. He should have. Diane Heller moves into 14 Lakeview Court 6 months before the election, but she campaigns like she's been there a decade. She's 61, sharp-jawed, with silver hair cropped close, and reading glasses she wears on a beaded chain around her neck. 30 years at a logistics firm in Memphis. Regional VP, the kind of title that comes with a reserved parking spot and the authority to ruin someone's Wednesday. Retirement doesn't suit her. Stillness doesn't suit her. The Pines of Serenity, with its relaxed board and inconsistently mowed common areas, strikes Diane less as charming and more as a project. She runs unopposed. The previous president, a 74-year-old named Bill Tackett, had held the position for 9 years, mostly because nobody else wanted it. Bill's leadership style consisted of approving the annual budget, scheduling 1 neighborhood cookout per summer, and ignoring everything else. People liked Bill. People didn't attend meetings. Diane changes that. Her first official act is a 12-page memo distributed to all 40 households. Gerald receives his copy in a manila envelope, hand-delivered to his porch. The memo outlines a community aesthetic vision, a phrase Gerald reads aloud to himself in his kitchen, coffee mug halfway to his lips, as if hearing the words will make them less absurd. The document is thorough. Lawn height maximums. Approved exterior paint paladins. Guidelines for acceptable outdoor storage. A section on dock maintenance that Gerald reads 3 times, his jaw tightening with each pass. All waterfront structures must conform to visual harmony standards as determined by the board's aesthetic review committee. There is no aesthetic review committee, not yet, but the memo references one on 4 separate pages. Gerald sets the document on his kitchen table next to the pepper shaker and a half-finished crossword. He stares at it the way a man stares at a rattlesnake coiled on his welcome mat. Not panicked, but very, very still. He knows this type. He spent 3 decades in civil engineering, navigating municipal boards and zoning commissions, and county inspectors who confused authority with competence. Diane Heller isn't new. She's a familiar species in an unfamiliar habitat. The difference is, those bureaucrats had actual jurisdiction. Over the next 2 weeks, Gerald watches the changes ripple through the community. New signs appear at the boat launch, laminated, zip-tied to the existing posts, listing rules that didn't exist a month ago. A neighbor, 3 doors down, Tom Perkins, gets a typed letter about his basketball hoop. Margaret Yoon, on Cedar Line Drive, receives a notice about her garden gnomes. Gerald hears about these through the usual channels. Tom grumbling at the mailbox cluster, Margaret mentioning it over the fence while Gerald trims his hedges. The complaints are casual, annoyed, not alarmed. The general consensus is that Diane will burn herself out by summer. Gerald nods along. He sips his coffee. He doesn't argue, but that evening, he pulls the manila envelope back out and reads the dock maintenance section one more time. He opens his filing cabinet, the old steel one his father used, and finds the folder labeled Easement Agreements, Lake Access. He doesn't do anything with it, not yet. He just confirms it's there. The lake glitters through his kitchen window, catching the last copper light of sunset. Somewhere out there, Diane Heller is drafting her next memo. Gerald rinses his mug and goes to bed early. The first envelope arrives on a Monday. Gerald finds it tucked inside his mailbox between a seed catalog and his electric bill. The HOA's logo, stamped in the upper left corners, a little pine tree inside a circle, like a badge no one asked for. He tears it open, standing at the end of his gravel driveway, the late afternoon sun warm on the back of his neck. Notice of violation. Aesthetic Standards, Section 4.7b. The fine is $150. Gerald reads it twice. The violation cites his aluminum fishing boat, a 14-foot Lund he's owned since 1998, for being visible from the common pathway and inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. There's a grainy photograph attached, clearly taken from the walking trail that curves past his property. The boat sits where it always sits, overturned on two sawhorses beside his dock, drying in the sun. He folds the letter, slides it into his back pocket, goes inside, and pours himself iced tea. He doesn't pay it. 2 weeks later, a second envelope. Same logo, same letterhead. This time the fine is $300. The original $150 plus a $150 non-compliance escalation fee. The language is sharper now. Words like persistent and willful disregard. A new violation has been added, the tackle shed, specifically its roof, which Diane's letter describes as weathered beyond acceptable community presentation standards. Gerald walks out to the shed and looks at the roof. Cedar shingles? Yes. Grayed by sun and rain? Sure. He built this shed with his own hands 12 years ago, back when his knees still cooperated without complaint. The wood smells like pine resin and old bait. He runs his palm across the doorframe. Weathered beyond acceptable standards. He almost laughs. The third fine arrives the following Friday, $500. This one targets his habit of cleaning fish on his dock, an activity Diane's letter refers to as the public preparation of animal remains in a visible recreational zone. Gerald sets the letter on his kitchen table and stares at it for a long time. The language doesn't sound like a neighborhood association. It sounds like a courtroom. 3 fines in 5 weeks, $950 total. Gerald is not a man who ignores problems. He spent 3 decades reviewing drainage plans, load calculations, structural tolerances, details that could kill people if you got them wrong. He respects process. He respects rules, even ones he disagrees with, as long as they're applied fairly. This isn't fair. He picks up the phone and calls the HOA's management number. A woman named Trish answers. She's polite, efficient, and completely unhelpful. All disputes must be raised at the next scheduled board meeting, she says, her voice carrying the rehearsed patience of someone who delivers bad news for a living. You're welcome to submit a written appeal in the meantime. When's the next meeting? 3 weeks from Thursday. Gerald writes the date on a sticky note and presses it to his refrigerator. He doesn't write an appeal. He decides he'll say what he needs to say in person, face to face, where Diane Heller can't hide behind letterhead and escalation fees. He spends the next 3 weeks gathering his documents. The original deed, the trust paperwork, a highlighted copy of the HOA's own CC and RS, with Section 2.1, jurisdiction and boundaries, flagged in yellow. He organizes everything in a manila folder, the edges aligned, the pages numbered, old habits. On the morning of the board meeting, Gerald irons a collared shirt. He polishes his boots. He tucks the manila folder under his arm and drives his truck to the community clubhouse, gravel popping under the tires. He has no idea that Diane won't let him finish a single sentence. The community center at Pines of Serenity Smells like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. It's a Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. sharp, and Gerald Whitmore sits in the third row of folding chairs wearing a pressed flannel shirt and his reading glasses. He's brought a manila folder. Inside it, copies of every fine notice, his property deed, a highlighted map of the original Whitmore acreage, and a one-page summary his attorney helped him draft. He's prepared. He's calm. He has no idea how little any of it will matter. The room holds maybe 30 chairs. 12 are occupied. Most of the faces Gerald recognizes. Retirees, a couple of younger families, the Nguyen's from Birchwood Lane. Nobody looks particularly excited to be here. Board meetings at Pines of Serenity have historically been 45 minutes of budget updates and mulch schedules. But tonight, Diane Heller sits at the front table with a printed agenda, a laptop, and the posture of someone who's been rehearsing. Gerald waits through the treasurer's report. He waits through a discussion about replacing the pool filter. He waits through a motion to approve new signage at the front entrance. His knee bounces once. He stops it. When Diane opens the floor for homeowner comments, Gerald stands. He buttons his jacket out of habit. 30 years of presenting to municipal boards will do that to a man. I'd like to address the fines levied against my property, he says. His voice is steady, measured. The voice of a man who has explained drainage gradients to skeptical county commissioners and lived to tell about it. He opens the manila folder. The violations cited reference structures and activities on land that falls outside the HOA's recorded jurisdiction. My property, including the dock, the shed, and the shoreline, is held under a separate deed predating this development by over 30 years. He holds up the map. I've highlighted the boundary lines. The CC&Rs govern lots within the platted subdivision. My parcel was never platted into it. The room is quiet. A few heads turn toward the front table. Diane doesn't look at the map. She doesn't ask to see the deed. She adjusts her laptop screen, tilts her chin upward about 2 degrees, just enough to look down her nose from a seated position, and speaks. Mr. Whitmore, the board has reviewed your property and determined that the structures in question are visible from community common areas and therefore fall under our aesthetic standards. She pauses, folds her hands. You can comply with the notices as written, or you can litigate. Those are your options. She says it like she's reading a drive-through menu. Gerald stands there for 3 full seconds. The folder is still open in his hands. Tom Nguyen shifts in his seat. Someone in the back coughs. I'm asking you to look at the deed, Gerald says, and I'm telling you the board has made its decision. The sentence lands like a door slamming. Gerald looks at the other board members. Rick Paulson, the vice president, studies his fingernails. Brenda Marsh, the secretary, writes something on her notepad without looking up. Neither of them speaks. Neither of them will. Gerald closes the folder. He nods once, not in agreement, but in understanding. The kind of nod a man gives when he realizes the conversation he prepared for isn't the conversation that's happening. He walks back to his chair. He sits. He stays for the remaining 11 minutes of the meeting through a vote on holiday decoration guidelines and a reminder about trash can placement. He doesn't speak again. The parking lot is dark when he steps outside. Gravel crunches under his boots. The air smells like pine needles and lake water, his lake water, though nobody in that room seemed particularly interested in that fact. He sets the manila folder on the passenger seat of his Silverado, pulls out his phone, scrolls to a contact he hasn't called in 4 months. His attorney picks up on the second ring. Dale, Gerald says. It's Whitmore. I need the third option. The kitchen smells like burnt coffee and old paper. Gerald sits at the oak table his grandfather built, the same table where Harold Whitmore signed the original deed in 1961, and stares at the stack of violation notices fanned out like a losing poker hand. 6 of them now. The latest one arrived this morning tucked inside his mailbox with the casual cruelty of a parking ticket. $500 a week. He picks it up. The Pines of Serenity letterhead features a pine tree logo that's too large for the page. Like Diane designed it herself and couldn't stop adding branches. Below it, the language is clinical. Failure to remediate aesthetic violations per Section 4.7b of the CC and Rs will result in continued weekly assessments and potential lien action against the property. Lien action against his property. Gerald sets the notice down. His hands are steady. That's the thing about 30 years of civil engineering. You learn to read blueprints, load calculations, stress tolerances. You learn where things break, and you learn that the person shouting the loudest in the room is usually the one standing on the weakest foundation. He pulls his phone from his shirt pocket and dials a number he hasn't called in almost a year. 2 rings. "Whitmore," says the voice on the other end. "You only call me when something's broken or someone's dead. Which is it?" Tom Aldridge has been the Whitmore family attorney since Gerald's father was alive. He's 71, semi-retired, and operates out of a converted farmhouse office in Maryville. He also happens to be one of the sharpest property lawyers in eastern Tennessee. "Neither," Gerald says. "Not yet, anyway." He explains everything. The fines, the boat, the tackle shed, the fish cleaning station on his own dock, Diane's face when she told him to comply or litigate. He keeps his voice even, the way he used to deliver project assessments to county boards. Facts first, emotions nowhere. Tom listens without interrupting. Gerald can hear him breathing, the faint scratch of a pen on a legal pad. When Gerald finishes, the line goes quiet for 4 seconds. "She told you to comply or litigate," Tom repeats. Those were her exact words. And she has no idea about the lake. Nobody on that board does. Nobody in the whole development, far as I can tell. They all just assume it's community property. Tom lets out a sound that's half laugh, half sigh. The sound of a man who spent 50 years watching people pick fights they can't win. "Gerald, you've got a third option." The pen scratching stops. The easement your father granted in 1986 was revocable. It was written that way on purpose. Harold insisted. The development company wanted a permanent easement, and your father told them to pound sand. So they agreed to a revocable license, renewable at the trustee's discretion. That's you. Gerald looks out the kitchen window. The lake catches the late afternoon light, turning the surface into hammered copper. 2 kids from the Brennan family are paddling a canoe near the far shore. A couple he doesn't recognize sits on the community dock with their feet in the water. "You're saying I can shut it down. I'm saying you own that lake. Every drop of water, every inch of shoreline, every blade of grass between the water line and the survey stakes. The HOA has 0 jurisdiction over int of it. And the access these people enjoy, it exists because your family allowed it." Gerald exhales slowly. The coffee maker gurgles its last breath on the counter behind him. "How long to draft the revocation letters?" "Give me 48 hours. I'll include a 30-day notice period on more than the easement requires, frankly. But it'll look better if this ever sees a courtroom." "It won't see a courtroom." "No," Tom agrees. "It won't." Gerald hangs up. He looks at the stack of violation notices one more time, then opens the junk drawer and drops them inside. He won't be needing those anymore. The surveyor arrives on a Wednesday morning, 7:15 a.m., before the dew has burned off the grass. His name is Cal Britton, a wiry man in his 60s with sun-cracked hands and a tripod slung over one shoulder like a rifle. He drives a mud-caked Ford F-250 with Britton Land Services stenciled on the door in faded yellow letters. Gerald meets him at the end of the gravel drive with 2 cups of black coffee. "Whole shoreline?" Cal asks, squinting at the plat map Gerald hands him. "Every inch." Cal whistles low through his teeth. He unfolds the map across the hood of the truck, traces the boundary line with a calloused finger. The property wraps around the lake like a crescent moon, 1,400 feet of shoreline from the northern tree line down past the boat launch and around to the marshy southern inlet where the herons nest. Cal nods once, folds the map, and gets to work. Gerald watches from his dock as Cal moves methodically through the tree line, driving fluorescent orange stakes into the earth every 15 feet. The stakes are 2 feet tall, capped with reflective tape. They catch the morning light and glow like tiny signal fires. By noon, the northern boundary looks like a construction zone. Neighbors notice. Tom Kendrick, 3 houses down, slows his morning jog to a walk. He stares at the stakes for a full 30 seconds, hands on his hips, before continuing up the path. Linda Marsh steps onto her back deck with a mug of tea and doesn't move for 10 minutes. Gerald can see her lips moving. Talking to someone on the phone, probably. He doesn't care. He sits on his dock and eats a ham sandwich. By Thursday afternoon, Cal finishes the southern boundary. 47 orange stakes ring the lake like a fluorescent fence. Gerald pays him in full, $2,800, written from the trust account. Money well spent. Friday morning, Gerald drives to the hardware store in Maryville. He buys 60 feet of galvanized chain, 2 heavy-duty padlocks, and a box of zip ties. He buys 12 no trespassing signs, the official kind, white text on red background, with the Tennessee Code annotated citation printed at the bottom. He loads everything into the bed of his truck and drives home with the windows down. The chain clinks against the tailgate the whole way, a sound like loose change in a dryer. He starts at the boat launch. 2 steel posts already flank the concrete ramp, remnants of an old gate the previous owner never finished. Gerald threads the chain between them, pulls it taut, and snaps the padlock shut. The click echoes across the water. The no trespassing signs go up next. 1 every 20 feet along the shoreline, zip-tied to trees, fence posts, and the orange survey stakes themselves. Gerald works steadily, methodically, the way he used to lay out bridge foundations. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The smell of pine sap sticks to his fingers. His knees ache from crouching. He doesn't stop. By Saturday evening, the lake is sealed. Chain across the boat launch. Signs ringing the shore. Orange stakes glowing in the last light of the day like embers. Gerald stands on his dock and surveys the work. The water is glass still. A base breaks the surface near the far bank, sending ripples out in perfect concentric circles. His phone buzzes in his pocket, a text from a number he doesn't recognize. "What the hell are you doing to the lake?" Gerald reads it once, slides the phone back into his pocket. He pulls his tackle box from the shed, ties a jig onto his line, and casts toward the lily pads. The lure hits the water with a soft plop. Somewhere behind him, up the hill, he can hear a screen door slam, then another. 30 days. The clock starts now. The morning air smells like pine sap and wet earth, and Gerald Whitmore sits at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee going cold beside him. It's Thursday, 6:12 a.m. The stack of violation notices, 7 of them now, totaling $2,750 in fines, sits in a neat pile next to the sugar bowl. He hasn't touched them in 3 days, hasn't needed to. He's memorized every word. His phone rests face down on the table. He picks it up, scrolls to a contact he hasn't called in over a year, and presses dial. 2 rings. Tom Aldridge, attorney at law. "Tom, it's Gerald." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Gerald Whitmore, I was wondering when you'd call." Gerald doesn't laugh. He stares out the window at the lake, his lake, where the first pale light catches the surface like crumpled foil. "I need you to draft something for me." He explains everything. The fines, the board meetings, Diane cutting him off. The phrase comply or litigate hangs in the air between them like smoke. Tom listens without interrupting, which is how Gerald knows the man is already thinking 3 moves ahead. "You still have the original deed in the trust documents?" Tom asks. "Locked in the fireproof safe, along with the easement agreements my father signed in 1986. And those easements, they're revocable?" "Revocable with 30 days written notice. My grandfather insisted on that language. Dad kept it. I never saw a reason to change it." Tom lets out a slow whistle. "Gerald, you understand what happens when you pull that easement?" "I do." Property values, access disputes, 40 homeowners who suddenly realize their lakefront community doesn't include a lake. Gerald takes a sip of coffee. It's cold. He drinks it anyway. "I understand. Then I'll have the letters drafted by Monday." Monday arrives with a sky the color of dishwater. Gerald drives his Ford F-150 to Tom's office in Maryville, a small brick building wedged between a barbershop and a tax preparer. The letters are waiting on Tom's desk, printed on heavy cream-colored legal stationery. 2 copies, one addressed to the Pines of Serenity Homeowners Association, care of Diane Heller, President. The other addressed to the county recorder's office. Gerald reads every line. The language is precise, almost surgical. It references the original 1961 deed. It cites the 1986 easement agreement by document number. It identifies the revocation clause, Section 4, Paragraph 2, and invokes it formally, effective 30 calendar days from the date of receipt. Once this is served, Tom says, leaning back in his leather chair. There's no quiet way to undo it. You'll have their attention. Gerald signs both copies. His hand doesn't shake. His handwriting is the same steady block print he used on engineering blueprints for 3 decades. I've had their attention, Gerald says. Now I want their respect. Tom sends the HOA letter by certified mail that afternoon. Gerald watches the tracking number populate in his email as he sits on his dock, boots hanging over the water. A largemouth bass breaks the surface 30 feet out, chasing something small and silver. The ripples spread in perfect concentric circles, then dissolve into nothing. He thinks about his grandfather, a man who bought this land when it was nothing but trees and mud and possibility. He thinks about his father, who let the developers build around the lake because he believed in being neighborly. He thinks about Diane Heller, who told him to comply or litigate. He chose neither. Somewhere in a sorting facility outside Knoxville, a certified letter with Gerald's signature sits in a bin, waiting to be delivered. It weighs less than an ounce. It carries the weight of 63 years of Whitmore ownership. Diane Heller has no idea what's coming, but in exactly 30 days, she'll understand. The first call comes at 6:14 a.m. on a Saturday. Gerald is standing on his porch, coffee mug warming both palms, watching mist curl off the lake like smoke from a dying fire. His phone buzzes against the railing where he left it. He glances at the screen, doesn't recognize the number. He lets it ring. By 6:47, 3 more calls, 2 voicemails, a text from a number he's never seen. Mr. Whitmore, this is Craig Dellinger. At 14 Lakeview Court, can we please talk about the signs? Gerald sips his coffee. The steam tastes like hickory and iron. The well water here has always carried a mineral bite. He watches a blue heron land on the far bank, just beyond the 3rd no trespassing sign. The bird doesn't seem bothered. Everyone else is. By noon, the Pines of Serenity Community Facebook group has erupted. Gerald doesn't have an account, but his neighbor, Tom Barfield, the retired postal worker, 3 lots down, shows him the screenshots on his tablet later that afternoon, standing in Gerald's driveway with the nervous energy of a man delivering bad news. You should see this, Tom says, tilting the screen. Gerald reads. The posts blur together in tone. Disbelief, outrage, fear, but a few stand out. Has anyone else seen the orange stakes along the lake? What is happening? My realtor just called. She wants to know if the lake access is still guaranteed. I don't know what to tell her. We bought this house specifically for the lake. If we lose access, we lose $60,000 in property value overnight. This is insane. That last one has 47 comments. Gerald counts them. 47 people with opinions about a lake they don't own. You really going through with this? Tom asks. His voice is careful, the way people talk when they're standing next to someone holding a grenade. Gerald hands the tablet back. Already done. The surveyor's orange stakes run the entire perimeter, 1.3 miles of shoreline, each stake planted at precisely 20-foot intervals. Gerald had watched the crew work for 2 full days. A young woman named Keisha, running the total station, while her partner drove the stakes with a mallet that echoed across the water like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Professional. Thorough. 64 stakes in total. The chain across the boat launch is 6-gauge galvanized steel, padlocked at both ends to concrete set posts. Gerald installed those himself. His hands still smell like the zinc coating when he rubs his fingers together. The no trespassing signs are the part that seems to bother people most. White plastic, black lettering, bolted to 4x4 cedar posts. Private property. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted under TC, a Section 39-14-405. Gerald's attorney had insisted on the statute citation. Makes it real, she'd said over the phone. People ignore signs. They don't ignore law. She was right. By Sunday evening, Gerald has received 19 phone calls, 11 texts, and 1 handwritten note slipped under his front door. The note is on lavender stationery, the handwriting tight and slanted. Please reconsider. My grandchildren swim in that lake every summer. He sets the note on his kitchen counter, Next to the stack of HOA fine notices, $3,750 worth of penalties for crimes like owning a tackle shed and cleaning fish on his own dock. He looks at the lavender paper. He looks at the fines. He feels something shift in his chest. Not guilt, something adjacent to it. A heaviness like holding a door shut against a wind that keeps pushing. But he doesn't pick up the phone. He doesn't write back. He walks to the dock, sits in his folding chair, and casts a line into water, so still it mirrors the first stars of evening. The bobber lands without a sound. Somewhere behind him, in 40 homes ringing his lake, the lights are on and the conversations are loud. He doesn't need to hear the words. He already knows what they're saying. What none of them are saying, till not yet, is the name of the person who started all of this. But they will. The first listing drops on a Tuesday. Gerald sees it while scrolling through his morning news feed, coffee going cold in his hand. 14 Lakeview Court, the Henderson split level with the wraparound deck, listed at $389,000. He remembers when Tom Henderson bragged about his Zillow estimate cracking $450 just last spring. Gerald sets his mug down on the porch railing and reads the description twice. Charming home in established community, wooded lot, close to local amenities. Not a single mention of the lake. By Thursday, there are 3 more. The realtor signs bloom along pines of Serenity Drive like dandelions after rain, red and blue and white, each one angled carefully toward the road, each one conspicuously silent about the 200-acre body of water sitting 100 yards from the front doors they're trying to sell. Gerald doesn't take pleasure in this. Not exactly. He stands on his dock at dawn, the chain across the boat launch, catching the first pink light of morning, and he watches a great blue heron stalk the shallows near the eastern bank. The bird doesn't care about property values. Neither do the bass. The lake is the same lake it was 6 weeks ago. Same spring-fed clarity, same cypress knees breaking the surface along the southern cove, same smell of wet stone and pine needles drifting across the water at first light. The difference is the silence. No kayaks. No kids splashing off the community dock, which now sits behind Gerald's no trespassing signs, technically on Whitmore land, a fact that had never mattered until Diane Heller made it matter. No pontoon boats puttering along the far shore on Saturday afternoons. Just the heron, the wind, and Gerald's own breathing. He hears about the Morrisons from Linda Chin, who stops him in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot with a canvas bag of groceries, clutched to her chest like a shield. They bought at $395, Linda says, her voice low, conspiratorial. Their mortgage is underwater now. Craig called 3 agents last week. Best offer he got was $310, and that was before the buyer found out about the lake access situation. Gerald nods. He doesn't ask how Linda knows this. In a community of 40 homes, information travels through walls. Diane's telling people you'll cave, Linda adds. She shifts the grocery bag to her other hip. She's saying you're bluffing, that no one would actually keep a whole lake to themselves out of spite. Gerald looks at Linda for a long moment. The parking lot smells like hot asphalt and the fried chicken from the deli counter inside. It's not spite, miss, he says. It's a property line. Linda nods slowly, like she's weighing something. Then she leans in. For what it's worth, Gerald, Craig Morrison told me he's ready to sign a recall petition. So are the Nguyen's, and both Kowalski brothers. Gerald files this away. He thanks Linda, loads his truck, and drives home past 4 realtor signs he didn't see last week. That evening, he sits on his porch with a plate of pan-fried bluegill, caught that morning, filleted on his own dock, on his own land, and watches the sun melt into the tree line across the water. The lake turns copper, then bronze, then black. Somewhere on the far shore, a light clicks on inside the Henderson split level, the one listed at $389. Gerald wonders if Tom Henderson is standing at his window right now, looking out at the water he can no longer touch. His phone buzzes on the armrest. A text from his attorney, David. Diane requested a copy of the original deed from the county clerk's office today. She's preparing something. Call me tomorrow. Gerald sets the phone down and picks up his fork. The bluegill is perfect. Crispy skin, tender flesh, a squeeze of lemon from the tree by his shed. Whatever Diane is preparing, Gerald has 30 years of reading blueprints and finding structural flaws. He finishes his dinner. He sleeps well. The emergency board meeting is 4 days away. The fluorescent lights in the Pines of Serenity clubhouse buzz like trapped wasps. It's Thursday evening, 7:02 p.m., and every folding chair in the room is occupied. A few residents lean against the wood-paneled walls, arms crossed, murmuring to each other in tight clusters. The air smells like burnt coffee and anxiety. Diane Heller stands behind the folding table at the front, her posture rigid, her fingers gripping a manila folder like it owes her money. She's wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse. Her armor for occasions she considers serious, and tonight she considers very serious indeed. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she begins, her voice pitched to carry authority. "As many of you are aware, Mr. Whitmore has taken certain actions regarding the lake." Certain actions. Gerald almost smiles from his seat in the back row. He'd arrived early, chosen the last chair on the left, and hasn't said a word to anyone. His attorney, Ray Callahan, sits beside him with a leather briefcase resting across his knees. Ray looks bored. Gerald knows better. Ray looks bored the way a rattlesnake looks asleep. "The lake," Diane continues, "has been a cornerstone of this community since its founding. It is, for all practical purposes, a shared amenity." "For all practical purposes" is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Tom Braddock, 3 rows up, raises his hand. "Diane, is it true the lake is privately owned?" The room shifts. Chairs creak. Someone coughs. Diane's jaw tightens. "There are historical property records that Mr. Whitmore's attorney has presented. We are reviewing them." "Reviewing them how?" Tom presses. "Because I talked to a title company yesterday, and they confirmed the Whitmore Family Trust holds the deed, has held it since 1961. Silence. The coffee maker in the corner gurgles its last breath. Diane sets the manila folder down, opens it, pulls out a single sheet of paper. "I've consulted with a property attorney in Knoxville. He believes there may be grounds to argue prescriptive easement, that the community's long-standing use of the lake establishes a legal right of access, regardless of ownership." Ray Callahan leans forward just slightly. Gerald watches him make a small note on a yellow legal pad. One word. Gerald can't read it from this angle, but he'd bet good money. It says something like unlikely. "To pursue this," Diane says, "the board is proposing a special assessment of $1,200 per household to fund legal counsel." The murmuring becomes a roar. Linda Ferris, who lives on Birchwood Lane with her husband and 3 kids, stands up without raising her hand. $1,200? To sue the man whose lake we've been using for free? "To protect our property values," Diane fires back. "Every home in this community was sold with the understanding isn't a deed, Diane." That's Carl Meacham, a retired real estate broker who knows exactly what he's talking about. He doesn't stand. Doesn't need to. His voice fills the room from his seat near the window. "I've seen the listing language. It says lake views and lake access. It doesn't say lake ownership. There's a difference, and any judge in Davidson County will tell you the same." Diane's nostrils flare. She looks down at her paper, then back up. "We'll put it to a vote. All in favor of the special assessment. Point of order." Ray Callahan's voice is calm, unhurried like a man ordering sweet tea. "Under your own bylaws, Article 9, Section 4, a special assessment exceeding $500 per unit requires a 2/3 supermajority and 14 days written notice to all homeowners. You've provided neither." The room goes quiet enough to hear the pine trees brushing against the clubhouse roof. Diane stares at Ray. Ray stares back. He clicks his pen once. "We'll table the vote," Diane says through her teeth. 14 days. Gerald rises from his chair, nods politely to no one in particular, and walks out into the cool Tennessee night. The lake glimmers through the trees, still and silver under a half moon. 14 days. Gerald has a feeling Diane won't like what happens in 14 days. The community center smells like burnt coffee and desperation. It's a Tuesday evening, 7:15 p.m., and every folding chair is taken. 41 homeowners packed into a room designed for 30, shoulder to shoulder, the overhead fluorescents buzzing like angry wasps. Gerald sits in the back row, arms crossed, his attorney Rachel and Gwen beside him with a leather portfolio balanced on her knees. Diane Heller stands at the front podium. She's wearing a navy blazer with gold buttons like she's commanding a warship instead of addressing a homeowners association in rural Tennessee. Her hands grip the edges of the lectern. Her knuckles are white. This special assessment, she begins, her voice pitched higher than usual, is necessary to protect the community's shared resources. A murmur ripples through the crowd. Gerald watches the back of Tom Kendrick's neck turn red 3 rows ahead. Tom bought his place on Lakeview Court specifically for the lake access. Listed it on Zillow last week. No offers. The proposed amount is $4,200 per household, Diane continues. This will fund legal counsel to challenge the Whitmore family's claim to... It's not a claim. Rachel's voice cuts clean across the room. She doesn't stand. Doesn't need to. It's a recorded deed. Shelby County, 1961. There's nothing to challenge. Diane's jaw tightens. The board has consulted with an attorney who believes... Who? Rachel asks. One word. It lands like a stone in still water. Diane blinks. That's board-privileged information. Because there is no attorney. Rachel opens her portfolio and removes a single sheet of paper. I filed a public records request with the county clerk's office. The title history is unbroken. The easement was voluntary, revocable, and properly revoked with 30 days written notice. Any lawyer who tells you otherwise is either lying or incompetent. The room goes quiet. Gerald can hear the ice machine humming in the kitchenette behind the back wall. Pete Salazar, who lives on Birch Lane, stands up without being recognized. He's a big man, a retired plumber, hands like catcher's mitts. I'm not paying $4,000 so you can lose a lawsuit, Diane. This isn't about winning or losing, Diane fires back. It's about standing up for what? Linda Marsh cuts in from the second row. She's still holding her car keys like she might bolt. You find a man for cleaning fish on his own property, and now we've all lost the lake. Diane's mouth opens, closes, opens again. We need to vote, says board member Carl Fredericks from the side table. He looks exhausted. His tie is loosened, and there's a coffee stain on his shirt pocket. He hasn't made eye contact with Diane all evening. All in favor of the special assessment to fund legal action against the Whitmore Trust, raise your hand. Diane's hand shoots up. 2 others follow. Margaret Boyle, Diane's neighbor and walking buddy, and Dennis Pratt, who Gerald suspects simply wasn't paying attention. All opposed. The room becomes a forest of raised arms. Gerald counts without moving his head. 34 hands. Some of them belong to people who haven't spoken to him in weeks. Some belong to people who signed Diane's original petition about his tackle shed. Every single one of them is raised now. Carl writes the number on a yellow legal pad. Motion fails. 34-3. Diane stares at the room like she's seeing it for the first time. Her gold buttons catch the fluorescent light. Nobody speaks. The ice machine hums. Pete Salazar is the first to stand. I'd like to motion for a recall election of the current board president. Seconded, Linda says, before Pete's sentence fully lands. Gerald uncrosses his arms. Rachel closes her portfolio with a soft click. Diane's grip on the lectern hasn't loosened, but something behind her eyes has. She knows. The recall vote is scheduled for 2 weeks out. But looking around this room, at the tight jaws, the folded arms, the 34 people who just chose a quiet fisherman over a woman in gold buttons, Gerald already knows how it ends. 2 weeks is just a formality. The new board president's name is Tom Kendrick, and he stands on Gerald's porch at 9:15 on a Saturday morning holding a bottle of Woodford Reserve and a manila folder. His truck idles in the gravel drive behind him, exhaust curling in the cool air. He doesn't knock a second time. Gerald opens the door in flannel and reading glasses, a mug of black coffee in his left hand. He looks at the bourbon, then at the folder, then at Tom. I come in peace, Tom says. Gerald steps aside. They sit at the kitchen table, the same pine table where Gerald's grandfather signed the original deed 63 years ago, though Tom doesn't know that. The kitchen smells like bacon grease and cedar. A stack of fishing magazines sits on the counter next to a legal pad covered in Gerald's tight, engineer's handwriting. Tom opens the folder first. Inside is a single sheet of HOA letterhead, the logo noticeably smaller than Diane's version, with 3 paragraphs of text and 6 signatures at the bottom. Formal apology, Tom says. Every board member signed it. Every fine against you has been reversed. The treasurer processed the refunds yesterday. $4,750 total, back to your account within 5 business days. Gerald picks up the letter, reads it slowly. His eyes pause on one line. The board acknowledges that it acted outside its jurisdictional authority and extends its sincere regret for the distress caused to Mr. Whitmore. He sets it down, takes a sip of coffee. That's a good start, he says. Tom exhales. He knows what's coming. Everyone on the new board knows what's coming, because Gerald's attorney sent a 3-page memo outlining the conditions for reinstating lake access. Tom pulls a second document from the folder, this one thicker, printed on heavier stock with tabs marking signature lines. Your attorney's draft, Tom says. We reviewed it. Made 2 small edits. Both cosmetic, nothing substantive. Our lawyer flagged them in red. Gerald puts on his reading glasses and flips to the first red notation. A comma splice corrected. He almost smiles. The second edit changes in perpetuity to for the duration of the easement agreement, which is functionally identical, but sounds less intimidating to homeowners who will need to vote on it. He flips to page 2. The core clause sits in the center of the page, bolded. No HOA board, committee, or representative shall levy fines, assessments, or penalties against any property owner for activities conducted on privately held land outside the HOA's recorded jurisdictional boundaries, as defined by the original plat survey filed with the county recorder's office. This is the sentence Gerald spent 4 evenings writing with his attorney. 7 drafts. Every word chosen like a load-bearing beam in a bridge, because that's how Gerald thinks. Structure, weight distribution, what holds and what collapses. This clause is non-negotiable, Gerald says. We know. Tom folds his hands on the table. The board voted unanimously to accept it. Gerald looks up. Unanimously? 34-3 was the recall margin, Tom says. Those 3 didn't run for the new board. The people who voted Diane out are the same people sitting in those seats now. They want the lake back, Gerald. But more than that, and I mean this, they want to make it right. The kitchen is quiet. Outside, a Carolina wren trills from the gutter. Gerald can hear the lake through the open window. That soft, rhythmic lapping against the dock pilings that has scored every morning of his life in this house. He picks up a pen from the counter, not the fancy one from his desk drawer, just a plain blue Bic. He signs on the first tabbed line, then the second, then the third. Tom signs opposite him. His hand is steady, but his jaw is tight. The look of a man who understands he's holding something fragile. Gerald caps the pen, sets it down. I'll have the chain off the boat launch by Monday, he says. Tom nods, reaches for the Woodford Reserve and cracks the seal. But Gerald is already looking past him, out the window, toward the water. There's one more thing he needs to do before any of this feels finished.